The case did not end with an arrest, and it did not end with a death. According to records, it continued in fragments, in sealed files, in testimony that stopped short, and in questions that were never fully answered. What remains is not a single event, but a long trail of moments where decisions were made quietly, where authority intersected with silence, and where accountability appeared to slow down rather than arrive. For years before the name became globally recognized, reports suggest that concerns were raised in limited circles. Local complaints, internal memos, and early warnings existed, but they did not converge into a decisive response. Documents indicate that patterns were identified, yet actions remained fragmented. Each agency appeared to see only a portion of the picture, while the full scope remained obscured by jurisdictional boundaries and institutional hesitation. According to court records, financial structures surrounding the central figure were unusually complex. Shell companies, trusts, and intermediaries appeared repeatedly, creating layers that were difficult to penetrate. These structures were legal on their surface, yet their opacity raised questions about intent. Investigators later noted that tracing money flows required cooperation across borders, a process that often stalled or slowed under administrative strain. As the years progressed, reports suggest that influence played a role in shaping outcomes. Legal teams with deep resources were assembled early. Negotiations took place behind closed doors, and agreements were reached that limited exposure. According to official filings, some of these arrangements were highly unusual in their scope, granting protections that were rarely extended in comparable cases. The rationale for these decisions was recorded, but the broader implications were not publicly debated at the time. Victims, according to testimonies, often encountered a system that felt distant and procedural. Their accounts were documented, but momentum was inconsistent. Some statements were revisited years later, others remained buried in archives. The passage of time itself became a factor, eroding evidence, dispersing witnesses, and complicating the pursuit of clarity. Media attention arrived in waves rather than as a steady force. Early reporting was limited and often localized. Larger investigations emerged only after patterns became impossible to ignore. Even then, access to sealed records and confidential agreements restricted what could be confirmed. Journalists noted gaps where information should have been, gaps that suggested decisions made far from public view. According to records from multiple jurisdictions, questions arose about coordination among authorities. Responsibility appeared dispersed. Federal and local agencies referenced one another, while critical moments passed without decisive intervention. Internal reviews later acknowledged missteps, yet stopped short of assigning direct accountability. The role of associations became another area of focus. Travel logs, contact lists, and event records indicated proximity to powerful individuals across finance, politics, and academia. Reports suggest that these connections did not necessarily imply wrongdoing by association, yet they complicated the narrative. The presence of influence created an environment where caution prevailed and where scrutiny appeared uneven. As legal proceedings unfolded, the public narrative often shifted. Some developments were framed as closures, while others reopened doubts. According to court documents, certain agreements limited the scope of future prosecutions, a fact that only became widely understood much later. The delayed recognition of these limitations fueled questions about transparency and fairness. The death at the center of the case marked a turning point, but not an end. Official findings addressed immediate circumstances, yet broader questions persisted. How had oversight failed? Why were warnings insufficient? What systems allowed prolonged gaps in accountability? Reports suggest that multiple reviews were conducted, each focusing narrowly, each leaving parts of the story untouched. In the aftermath, attention turned to records management. Evidence storage, document retention, and information sharing practices were scrutinized. According to internal audits, procedural weaknesses existed long before the case became public. These weaknesses were not unique, but the consequences in this instance were unusually severe. Civil litigation brought additional details into view. Depositions, filings, and settlements revealed fragments of a larger picture. Yet even here, confidentiality agreements limited disclosure. According to legal analysts, the balance between privacy and public interest remained unresolved, shaped by precedent rather than principle. International dimensions further complicated the case. Properties, accounts, and movements crossed borders. Cooperation depended on treaties and diplomatic channels, each introducing delays. Reports indicate that some requests for assistance were fulfilled slowly, others not at all, leaving investigative paths incomplete. Public inquiries promised answers, but their scope was often constrained. Mandates focused on specific failures rather than systemic conditions. According to transcripts, testimony highlighted procedural errors, yet avoided deeper examination of power dynamics that influenced decision-making. Over time, the case transformed from a singular investigation into a symbol of broader concerns. Issues of privilege, access, and unequal accountability entered public discourse. Yet symbols do not resolve cases. They illuminate questions, but they do not substitute for findings. Documents continue to surface intermittently. Some are unsealed after years of litigation. Others remain classified or redacted. Each release generates renewed attention, followed by renewed frustration. The information adds context, but rarely closure. According to records, reforms were proposed in response to identified failures. Policy changes addressed oversight, victim support, and prosecutorial transparency. Implementation varied. Some measures were adopted quickly, others remained recommendations without enforcement. The individuals affected by the case continued to seek recognition and accountability. Their efforts, documented in filings and public statements, emphasized the human cost behind procedural language. Yet the system responded in stages, not with finality. As time passes, the challenge of resolution increases. Memories fade, priorities shift, and institutional focus moves elsewhere. The case remains active in fragments, alive in questions rather than conclusions. What persists is an unresolved tension between what is known and what remains concealed. According to available records, no single authority holds the complete narrative. Responsibility is distributed, and with it, the difficulty of closure. The case stands as an example of how complexity can become a shield. Layers of process, jurisdiction, and influence intersected in ways that slowed momentum. Each delay was justifiable in isolation, yet consequential in accumulation. In reviewing the timeline, investigators and analysts continue to identify moments where outcomes might have differed. Alternative decisions, earlier interventions, clearer communication. These observations, recorded in reports, serve as lessons rather than resolution. The public continues to ask whether all relevant facts have been disclosed. The answer remains uncertain. Transparency arrives incrementally, shaped by legal constraints and institutional discretion. According to legal scholars, unfinished cases exert a unique pressure on systems. They expose limitations without offering closure. They remain present, not as active prosecutions, but as unresolved records. The silence surrounding certain aspects is not empty. It is structured, maintained through procedure and precedent. Breaking that silence requires more than disclosure. It requires willingness to confront uncomfortable implications. As the years extend, the case resists conclusion. It exists in documents, in testimony, in policy debates. It remains unfinished, not because time has run out, but because resolution demands a convergence that has yet to occur. What remains is the record itself. Incomplete, but instructive. According to that record, the case continues, not in courtrooms alone, but in the questions it leaves behind.